Good evening and welcome back to CNN Money Switzerland. I'm Olivia Chang. Let's take a look now at all the latest headlines. While many are in the race to try and find and develop a coronavirus vaccine, one widely available steroid drug has caught the attention of researchers in the UK. According to findings of their trial, Dexamethasone could help critically ill COVID-19 patients. Those involved took a low dose for up to 10 days. The Geneva-based World Health Organization welcomed the results, calling it, quote, the first treatment to be shown to reduce mortality in patients with COVID-19 requiring oxygen or ventilator support. Swissquote today said the company started the year on a strong note, with many taking to its trading platforms during market turmoil in the first 6 months. Net revenues up over 40% in this period compared to the same time last year, now at more than 116 million Swiss francs, and pre-tax profit also more than doubled. A closer look at the second half of the year will be announced later in August. The race to find the next head for the World Trade Organization is heating up. This against a backdrop of the pandemic, a global recession, as well as US-China trade tensions. My colleague Casimir Jefford has the latest on that, plus what qualities will be needed to fill those shoes.
It's going to be a huge challenge. I mean, there are always the question of who should head an international organization is always intensely political because of this need to find consensus. But I think at this time there will be a recognition that the key is to find someone who can manage politically the US-China relationship. It's been said that the leader in the chief executive of an international organization, they need to be a politician, a diplomat, and a manager. So we need someone who's able to provide vision carefully and strategically, but provide vision of a way forward that can do the diplomatic work of bringing the countries on board behind that, and also has the managerial skills to implement it within the organization. It is a tall order, but what we don't need at this time is someone who is a blank page and who has no charisma or willingness to try. We really need to have a true leader at this time.
The candidacy process has been sped up. Normally it takes about 9 months. Here they're trying to find someone in just 3 months after Robert Azevedo handed in his notice early. Are we going to find a candidate in that time, or will they be forced to appoint an interim Director General?
Well, I'm sure that the chair of the General Council, who's in charge of the process, is going to make his best effort to complete this by the end of August so that we have a new Director General in place. Otherwise, it will, as you've mentioned, it will go to one of the 4 Director Generals of the WTO will be in a caretaker position. But I'm quite sure that they will find someone in the coming months. I mean, at worst, it might be after the US election. But I think everyone understands it's vital to have someone in place before the end of the year so they can help the organization prepare for the ministerial conference next year, which was postponed from this year. And there, so much of these priorities and the work I set out before will need to go ahead. So they have to have someone in place by then, and I'm sure that they will.
US President Donald Trump has been quite vocal about the WTO and its need to reform, especially the disputes settlement system, blocking the appointment of judges. What kind of damage could this do in the long term to the WTO, and how far up the agenda will it be for the next Director General to try and resolve this?
I think it's got to be one of the key issues for the next Director General. Finding ways to bring the US back on board at the WTO is a central issue. I mean, not just for the Director General, but for the membership as a whole. I think everyone understands they need the US at the table, willing to contribute, bringing proposals, being a constructive player. And so I think there's a lot of willingness to find and explore ways to do that. And I'm sure China also would welcome efforts by the Director General to broker and help promote dialogue with the US. I think everyone understands that the current situation is not in the collective interest. I can't speak to how much or how far China is willing to go on that, and also how far the US will be willing to compromise. But I think even the fact that the US has said that it's willing to engage in the Director General selection process implies that at least they don't intend to walk away altogether from the WTO. There's something in here at the WTO that they also need. and that they will be willing to work with other member states toward.
Could we see, I mean, the US has already this year, we've seen pulled out of funding the WHO. Is there any risk of a similar move happening with the WTO if it doesn't address some of the issues and some of the reforms that have been demanded in the near term?
I think the risk is there. I mean, one would be naive not to think not, in the case that, you know, they made a threat to the WHO recently, and so they have pulled out of other international organizations. I think here, however, that you know, Trump is playing a two-level game. He's appealing to domestic political constituencies. He obviously has some strong concerns about the WTO, and there are many in US Congress. But I think there's an equally strong set of players in the US who would argue for the importance of US engagement, for the importance of multilateral approaches to trade, and that this will benefit not only US businesses, but the US economy and you know, jobs and so on within the US, that the multilateral approaches are important. And the big wild card, of course, is we don't know what will happen with the US elections. I would imagine that if there was a Democratic president, they are less likely to walk away from the WTO, but some of the issues the WTO faces precede the Trump administration. There were concerns in the US about WTO reform before that, and they still need to be addressed. But I think the hope is that the US will stay engaged. It will push. There are many reforms that they're right to call for. And that we should look constructively for ways forward. Most of the WTO membership agrees there's a need for reform. The question is just exactly what it will look like. And hopefully they can find a DG who will help them get there.
So last question before you go. Any guesses at this point on who could be sitting in the DG seat then come the 1st of September?
Well, we have 3 candidates, official candidates so far. One is from Mexico, Jesus Siade. We have Akonjo Iweala from Nigeria, who's the former finance minister. And we have Hamid Madou, who is he's from the WTO Secretariat and an Egyptian attorney. So there's 3 in the mix, but there are several others who we expect from the European Union. There's names from the UK, from Spain, Kenya. There are several other names in the mix, so it's a bit too early to say now. I think that what is most important going forward is that we have the best qualified leader for this moment in time, and that will be the person who can provide a political vision combined with the diplomatic skills to know how best to drive that forward, and the managerial capacity to implement the changes that are necessary within the WTO as an institution itself.
Now, what happens to medications and prescriptions during a time like coronavirus? The CEO of the Swiss e-commerce pharmacy, Zur Rose, says the crisis is leading many to go online for their next dose. Here's more on that.
We strongly believe that the COVID-19 effect increased the acceptance of e-commerce in the pharmacy field. There are plenty of people who say, why should I actually governments tell me to stay at home, tell me to ask for telemedicine services, for example, and then I have to go with a prescription to a brick and mortar pharmacy to get my pharmaceuticals. Doesn't make any sense. And so therefore we strongly believe that the COVID-19 accelerated the shift from offline to online, the acceptance of e-commerce in the healthcare sector in general. And if you look at what happens with telemedicine, so the demand actually tripled, and there we see that this effect will stay.
Zur Rose is still yet to be profitable. What's your reasoning behind that, and what kind of investments will you be taking over the next few years?
Yes. So, I mean, we are in a market that is growing tremendously, and I mean, the pharmacy market overall we have here in Europe an e-commerce penetration of about 2 to 3%. We have to invest in growth, which means to invest in marketing to get new customers. For which reason we think it doesn't make sense look on the earnings, but to look more on the revenues, on the growth of revenues. And finally, with all the scale effects and with having a much higher amount of prescription business, so the profitability will arise, let's say, over the next, let's say it will be in the next really short-term period of time.
You're in Germany, you're in Switzerland, France and Spain as well. But as you
Yes.
mentioned, there is this talk about electronic prescriptions being mandatory in Germany. What is that going to change in terms of your focus with all these European markets? How much then of your time will you put into Germany rather than the rest?
Absolutely. So, I mean, Germany is the biggest pharmacy market in Europe. Germany is one of the first countries who allowed the mail order channel for not only OTC products, but also prescription drugs. Therefore, we face a market of in Germany of 50 billion euros, and now with that introduction of the electronic prescription, already before that change, that the prescriptions will be mandatory, the focus was on that German market. And so it will stay on that German market until we will have the situation that everything is in place to take full advantage of that change in the regulatory framework. And therefore, again, Germany is the number one priority. Nevertheless, there are also opportunities in other countries. If you look at France, where the government is discussing liberalization in the OTC field, so of course we won't miss the opportunity to grow in the OTC field if ever the liberalization really takes place. But this is then sort of a priority number two, and there are more opportunities to come. I mean, actually, we talked about the evolving strategy from just a retailer with a transactional business to more an ecosystem approach where we combine our own medication business with digital services in order to have a better outcome of the medication process. And here, that's then a lot. Actually the next phase where we aim to be the number one e-commerce, or let's say healthcare ecosystem in Europe, partnering with important players like let's say MySugar or let's say Ada as the two examples, where companies established relevant services for chronic disease customers in order to have a better outcome of the medication process again. So it's all about having the vision that the people can manage their health sort of within one click. So that's what we are aiming for. And so that's coming then as a next priority. But nevertheless, we are already now working on on the establishment of such partnerships, because we strongly believe that these services will be of such importance in order to have again, I repeat myself, in order to have a better medication outcome.
What does the future of private banking look like? One thing is for sure, wealth managers will need to work with huge amounts of data and be able to give more holistic advice. Founder and CEO of FinTech Canopy tells us more.
You see a lot of consolidation. If you see the total number of banks out there, the actual number is reducing, but the bigger banks are getting bigger and bigger. So we are getting into a place where there's technology, there is larger economies of scale, but these economies of scale also allow these banks to invest in platforms, right? Both in terms of product as well as technology. So that, I think, is a big trend trend that we see. So if you see the asset growths at the on the top 7-8 banks, it's been going very much in one direction. The other trend that we are seeing is that because, again, driven by technology, you have now specialized providers who are able to create some fairly niche products like, thematic funds or some specific private equity or ESG focused funds, and they are able to distribute to these banks because of the scale and the efficiency. So I would say these are the two main trends we are seeing, and now there is a small sub trend which has been brought in by the COVID situation, where banks suddenly are sort of, I think, as part of their BCP plan, they will be required to do a lot more digital onboarding, a lot more digital interaction.
And what about the profile of the private banker itself? How is the job changing?
If you go back in time, there were, a very strong, let me know your, very strong relationship kind of an animal. Now it changed into, you need to know the client's personal situation, but also the investment portfolio of the bank. So that's sort of where we are, but we are now changing. And what we are now seeing is you need to be able to, not only see the client's portfolio at your bank, but also client's overall portfolio, what is held away from you. The client might own a lot of illiquid assets like real estate or private equity. They might have a lot of ESG sort of criteria that they use, social sentiment analysis, etc., etc. So the advice needs to become a lot more holistic. And there is also this trend now of setting up single family offices, which is again related, because you see that there is a gap in the offering out there, and therefore the private banker will need to kind of shift towards a holistic advice, understand the client's entire situation, not just what is held with them, and then add value on that basis.
You can consolidate data from several documents, even PDFs. What's the added value then for?
When we started doing this, we've thought that it'll be very easy to aggregate data from banks and various sources, and we realized that there is no worldwide data standard. We realized that most banks are not set up to give data electronically, and to an extent don't want to. We found that a lot of alternative assets actually are simply not available in electronic format. Plus, there is real estate and cars and yachts and art collection. So, being able to use existing PDF data as a data source is a very unique capability that we have. The technology part of it becomes quite complex at one point, but that's not the real thing. The idea is that we are able to take data in any format and then make sense of it, draw pictures for the client, because the client finally needs to make a decision. So we should be able to provide complete, correct data without having the client worry about what kind of format is the data in and what's coming, what's not coming, and give it to them in a way that they appreciate the situation and then make a very informed decision. So if our client is able to do that, then we have done our job.
Credit Suisse is one of Canopy's biggest investors and clients, and as Tanmay Sharma has mentioned, data is power now. He explains how data becomes a weapon in the hands of relationship managers, giving them insight into how their clients react to market movements, as well as their allocation strategy and biases.
We are weaponizing data. Now, let me first clarify, none of this data moves without the client's specific approval. So if a bank, and we deal with many banks, not just Credit Suisse. So if your banker has access to data that is held away, it has come to the banker because the client authorized us to give them the data. But yes, once the data is with the banker, we weaponize it. So we are telling the banker what's going right, what's going wrong, what's the trend, where are you scoring, where are you sort of falling behind, what can you do better, and where are you doing well, and how to position yourself in your next meeting. And that's it. And in fact, I'm an ex-banker myself, and I can understand that a banker kind of needs a lot of information to do their job, and we are hopefully helping with that.
Remember, you can catch up with any of our content simply by heading over to cnnmoney.ch. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you very shortly. Good evening.